Good afternoon. My name is Allison Sater, and I am a member of the Board of Directors of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. On behalf of the museum's leadership, survivors, staff, and volunteers, I would like to thank you all for joining us for a special virtual program, When Hate Becomes a Crime, presented by David Williams. Anti-Semitism has been called the longest hatred. It knows no borders and has led to some of the most horrifying events in human history, including the Holocaust. Today, anti-Semitism is on an alarming rise. The growth in the number, ferocity, and intensity of public attacks should concern us all, as should the apathy that often greets it. As a world leader in Holocaust education, an important part of the museum's mission is to teach and learn from lesser known or commonly misunderstood aspects of the Holocaust, and to encourage everyone to apply lessons from those events to the present day. That is why this afternoon, we are here for this important program that is part of the museum's ongoing community initiative, Understanding and Confronting Anti-Jewish Hate. Before we begin, I would like to give special thanks to all of the sponsors of this powerful series that were listed in the opening slides. It is now my honor to introduce today's speaker, David Williams. David is a prosecutor in the Special Prosecutions Bureau of the Cook County Assistant State's Attorney's Office. David also founded and currently leads the Cook County State's Attorney's Office Regional Organized Crime Task Force. He is also an executive board member of the Joint Terrorist Task Force and the FBI Cyber Crimes Task Force, an adjunct professor of criminology at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and one of the museum's law enforcement training facilitators. With that, I will turn it over to David to lead today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. Let me just get this up. Okay. Thank you. First, I want to say thank you for having this in the seminar because I think it's fantastic. There's so many different issues that's going on with hate crimes and anti-Semitism. It's incredibly important to continue to spread awareness, education, and continue pursuing enforcement of these crimes. And there's many different layers of issues within hate crimes and within the area that's important to understand some of the problems in identifying them and enforcing them, investigations and prosecutions. So hopefully today will be helpful to talk about what a hate crime is, why it's important, some best practices, investigations, and we'll kind of talk about a case study. So the Loop Synagogue Sanctuary, some of you may be aware, this built in 1929 in downtown in Loop, Chicago, a symbol for Jewish life in Chicago and in the area. This stained glass window is gorgeous if you have an opportunity to be there. A famous architect did the work. I got involved with the Loop Synagogue back in February 5th, 2017, when an individual jumped out of a car close to midnight, smashing the window and affixing swastika stickers to it. And I think it's important to note, again, this imagery, which looks like broken glass and swastikas, which I think is reminiscent of Kristallnacht and kind of that hatred. So when you talk about a hate crime, this is a criminal damage to property, right? It's a broken glass, it's a broken window. It's not the highest level of crime in Chicago where we have so much, horrible crimes going on. But this emphasis and this imagery, it's not just to attack the temple, but it's attack a community. And that's why these cases have to be taken so seriously. And we look at why hate crimes are important, right? So number one, it's an attack on innocent victims, individuals who are just going about their business, walking about their day and being attacked for no reason except by who the defendant perceives them to be or what they're about. So this is number one, why it's important. Number two, it's meant to terrorize a community. It's not just attack on one individual, but meant to threaten them and send waves of fear throughout the community, what to do. Second, and another, of course, is this individual who is committing this crime, their behavior, we've seen time and time again, starts escalating and become more and more violent if not addressed, if they're not held accountable. And we've seen this lead to active shooters, which you all know about, the terrible that we see today's news every day. And it comes across in many different areas. Unfortunately, here's, from the Pittsburgh Synagogue, Tree of Life. Here's another shooting in El Paso that killed a Latino, almost 23 or 25 Latino individuals by Walmart because of who they were. The church in South Carolina, a black church that was killed by a white supremacist, went in shooting. 8 killed who were working at Asian spas and Asian individuals in Georgia. A Sikh temple in Wisconsin, which 6 were murdered because of some individual believed that they were Muslim. Another, the lesbian and gay trans community attacked and shot in Denver. I mean, there's so many different aspects. Do we see the worst of what can happen if these are not addressed? And when we look back at these active shooters, we see a manifest and a history of hate activity, if not hate crimes. So if we can address these early on, perhaps we can put a stop and prevent some of these terrible tragedies. So what are the issues in investigations? Number one, understanding the crime. What is the crime? How do we investigate it? Victims reporting the crime. Is it being identified? Is that information going to the right place? Is it being used properly? Again, do individuals, number one, when I talk about identifying the crime, I'm talking about victims and people on the streets, and also law enforcement identifying it and connecting the dots in these cases. And then once you have that, is there a full investigation of the offender by the police or by law enforcement? So a broken glass, an attack here or there, what else are they involved in? What else are they doing? And that's incredibly important as we look at these cases. Underreporting. Now, this is an imagery from 2015. And you look at, they have these stats, and I'm not going to go huge into stats, but over 200,000 hate crimes they believe occurred, only 5,000 reported. So if you look at it, this is what it looks like, and the lack of reporting. And this is 2015, where there's been a rise in hate crimes and maybe a rise in some reporting, but so small that it's really not getting where we need to be. We need to identify these things when they happen, and we need to know so people can be held accountable and identify them. So the lack of reporting, and why is that? Well, we'll talk about that in a second, but also the increase in hate crimes over the last 4 years. You know, all hate crimes up 40%. Asian hate crimes, we've seen 223%. Jewish hate crimes, anti-gay hate crimes. And of course, since October 7th, there's been a surge in anti-Semitic incidents of 360% across America. This is terrible, terrible news in the way we're going. So we have to look at how do we address that? How can we attack this? And the first thing is educational understanding the difference between a hate incident and a hate crime. So a hate incident is non-criminal, right? We have a First Amendment right here in America to spew whatever hate and ugliness that we want. You know, that's from the protests in Charlottesville, where they're talking, you know, they should not replace us, talking about the anti-Semitic replacement theory. They have a right in America. People have a right to protest and say horrible things. That's not a crime in and of itself. But when that hate motivates and you commit a crime based on that motivation, then it becomes a hate crime. We'll talk about more about what the statute looks like in a second. So, and that has been challenged by the First Amendment. First Amendment challenges in court saying, well, I have a right to say whatever I want. You do have a right to say whatever you want. But if you do it as motivation for a crime, that enhances it. Okay. So, you know, some of these pictures I like to go through, you know, horrible pictures. It used to be the West Bureau Baptist Church, if you remember, used to protest at soldiers' funerals coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Just horrible, horrible things. But they have a right to protest. We encourage people to protest properly and peacefully. When that protest is no longer peaceful, then it can become a crime, and motivated, it can become a hate crime. And again, why it's important. This is this continuum of hate violence. So when you look up at this pyramid, you know, obviously the top is genocide, and we talk about the Holocaust. But when you draw down through the pyramid, down below, individual acts of prejudice, right? When people start name calling, when they commit crimes, when they dehumanize people, you know, words matter. Propaganda matters. It creates a bias that can lead to filter into something much, much worse. So it's important that we attack this case at the base of this pyramid to try and solve the problem before it becomes even worse. So, and the importance of reporting non-criminal hate bias. So you say, well, if it's not a hate crime, somebody's yelling these horrible things, why Why would I report it? If you have a right to do so, well, that's not a violation of law. It may or may not be. That should be investigated. When you see, as an individual, see something on the street, or somebody do something, or somebody yell something, or a sign say something, an individual may not know the full context of that person's actions and whether they've committed crimes in other places, done other things. So it's important that bias motivated incidents are reported. The police should take a report, and that should be filed with them. If you don't get help from them, you should call advocacy agencies. There's a number on the list at the end to help, because this helps build the foundations when those incidents escalates into violence. Okay, so it helps address them in many different ways. So they help strengthen the claim of the court. So let me just tell you in legal terms, when we have a case to present and somebody commits a crime, we can file a motion, what's called a proof of other crimes or evidentiary motion. Okay, so on the day that they committed this act, they broke a window, they beat somebody up, they attacked somebody, and then claim that they had no racial or religious bias whatsoever. But we have on 5 other incidents them standing on the corner spewing some hate, or them being involved in a group that espouses hate, or them connecting to it. We can use that to show a lack, to show their intent, to show their motive, to show absence of mistake, even to show identity. We can find other victims to testify about what this person did, what their actions were, in order to build a stronger case. Think about a case in which you have one individual who is attacked and the offender says something racially or religiously motivated. Okay, that standalone may not be too strong, but if we have that individual in 5 or 6 other incidents, that case becomes incredibly strong. So reporting all of these incidents is immeasurably important. And why are these cases underreported? There's so many different reasons, right? It's hard to characterize. And you have so many different individuals who are victims of hate crimes and hate incidents. Many just don't want to deal with it again, right? They don't want to be victimized. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's somebody at work. Maybe it's somebody to deal with. They want to call and get authorities involved. They don't, because they have to go on with their job. Others maybe don't want to have their privacy compromised. Others maybe if the community don't want to be outed or putting themselves at risk. Others come from nations or countries in which they have fear of law enforcement, or they themselves hear a fear of law enforcement and don't feel they can trust them. Others with immigration status issues. I can tell you, Chicago is a sanctuary city, Cook County is a sanctuary city. If there's somebody who's an immigrant, has a problem with immigration, they're reporting that case as a hate crime. Being a victim of hate crime will not affect their immigration status. It will not be reported to other authorities and change that. And there's a lot of other issues culturally that may be involved. And they may not be aware that they were a victim of a hate crime. I like this one particularly because I was talking to a rabbi on Devon Avenue who says, every day people come by and they hear the verbal abuse or something happens. So we had a case down there, and we'll talk about it later, in which there are 10 or 12 incidents that the defendant did. Previously, down the block, this defendant gets an argument and spews some hate down the corner. Now, that incident was not reported because that victim did not know that a block down, he smashed a window to a synagogue. So people don't always know that there's a connection with what's happening. So the more information that's put in the system, the better we are. And of course, this is something that is important to understand if you ever deal with somebody who's a victim of a hate crime. And this is something that I also teach law enforcement, is that it's a little different. We all feel violated when we become victims of a crime. Somebody steals from a house, somebody steals the phone, somebody steals my computer. But when you're walking down the street and you get punched and you don't know the reason why, it's a completely scary situation for a lot of people. And many people react differently. Most of these individuals or victims are not used to being involved in the criminal justice system and don't know exactly what comes forward and don't know how they behave. So people become confused oftentimes. They're not sure what to do, which is normal. They may want to minimize the incident. Oh, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Or they may shock, or sometimes they're angry and belligerent, want to come forward. And so there's all these different things that compound trauma. So when talking to a victim, it's important to kind of draw out that information, allow them to kind of express themselves in this scenario, to fully understand what they're going for. This is, and I look clinically at it, to get the best witness we can to be able to replicate what happened and tell us what happened in the most accurate detail. So it's incredibly important too, when working with victims, to know that there is trauma that goes along with becoming a victim and what happens with them. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of what a hate crime is. So hate crime, somebody commits a misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor offense. A misdemeanor offense is any crime in which you can be sentenced to less than a year in prison. Simple assaults and batteries, criminal damage of properties, all these things are considered, on the lower end of the punishment scale of crimes in Illinois. When you commit one of these crimes, which are misdemeanors if you commit them without any motivation, most of the time, but if you do it by reason of actual or perceived race, color, creed, religion, ancestry, gender, sexual orientation, physical, mental ability, national origin, when you do this as a motivation for committing that crime, all of these misdemeanors become enhanced to felonies. Okay, with felonies, again, they can be probationable, but you can go to jail for up to 1 to 3 years, and if your second offense, 3 to 7 years. If you're put on probation, there are a number of conditions of probation that are specific to the hate crime statute. So victim impact statements, so victims can come and testify about what you did and how it affected them. Probation, 200 hours of community service. Hate crimes probation, meaning that you have to be under some sort of a therapy to talk about the hate narrative that you're connected to, a fine, damages. So all these things kind of put more into place about if somebody's put on probation, which we'll talk about that as well. And this is kind of important to understand because many times I think a lot of people don't understand when a murder is committed, right? And if the murder is based on some hate motivation, they're like, how come they're not charged with a hate crime? And the reason is oftentimes is, I'll tell you what, for hate crime, we have to prove motive. We have to prove that they did this because of one of these protected classes. In a murder case, you don't have to prove motive. It's nice, the jury wants to hear it, the judge wants to hear why it happened, but it's not an element. It is an element that fits in hate crime. And if somebody commits a murder and sentenced to a murder, they'll go to jail a minimum 20, somewhere between 20 and 60 years in Illinois. So you see, these class felonies are much smaller. So if you're looking at that period of time, they may or may not be charged with the case with hate crime. And then also there's hate crimes, and we've seen, like in the case in Atlanta, when they murdered the jogger, the state can do a prosecution and sentence them, and then the federals can also do an additional prosecution. But again, it may not be increasing the time that they be sentenced to jail. So I know this, I kind of put this in there. Some people don't understand why. They don't think it's funny. I like it because, here's a Coke can being attacked by a bunch of Pepsi cans. And I talk about this because hate crimes can happen in many different forms and ways that we don't often think of. My first case of hate crime, the defendant was an Asian woman and an African male. Those are the defendants against the victim being a Latino male. So it's not normally what you think of as a hate crime committed. The hate crime statute is written in a way that it wants to attack these misdemeanors that are motivated by a particular reason based upon these classes, right? It doesn't think about who is the more victimized in the world, but it's kind of a narrow focus on that kind of general thing. So we talk about it. It doesn't always come in the way that you may think it would look. And it's important to understand, to keep a broad mind on these cases and evidence as it comes through. So motives, what types of motives are we talking about? So motives can be actual or perceived, right? The words that make it clear that a mistake by an offender will not exonerate him or her. So it's about what's in the defendant's mind, okay? They don't have to be right. So an offender targets an individual for being an Arab. I'm going to attack this person for being Arab or Muslim, but the individual is actually Latino. It doesn't mean, oh, well, I guess not a hate crime because I mistakenly attacked this person and I was wrong. No, it doesn't matter. It's what's in the defendant's head and the motivation behind it. It doesn't mean that they have to be right. Other motives, you do not have to prove that they hate all members of the group or even are targeting them because they hate them. There are cases in which individuals would go into some gay predominantly gay area because they felt that they could rob them easier because for some, miscalculated reason, they didn't believe they'd fight back. It doesn't say I hate gays, but if they're targeting them for this reason because they are gay, then that also can be considered a hate crime. And then another area, it doesn't have to be somebody going out to look for those individuals um, to attack them for that reason, right? If there's a road rage incident and steps off from a road rage incident or a bar fight and becomes a crime, then I think you could be charged with a crime. It doesn't have to be I'm going out to, burn, write swastikas on the wall, or I'm going to, burn um, this flag down or whatever it is. It can be combined with another crime. Um, so, and I'll get to your questions near the end as I go through it, but please keep them coming if you have them. So this is why it's important to identify the types of offenders and identify who we're dealing with, right? So is the offender who commits a crime, is it a one-off? Is it an individual who just committed something out of the spur of the moment, or because they, acted, writing graffiti somehow? Was it reactive? Group that this is our neighborhood. We don't want you in our neighborhood, and they attack you because they want people away from their neighborhood. Or is it something more localized? Or a local leader who is encouraging and organizing a group internally? Or is it a national organization? And we've seen, with the online presence with social media, people being radicalized, in their basement, just like terrorist groups, radicalizing individuals that go commit hate acts and hate crimes from, being radicalized within their own home. So it's important to see this. Or is it a lone wolf? It's important to investigate to find out what type of offender we have in order to see what needs to be done. Is it something that the local police can handle, or do we need to enlist federal agencies, the FBI, Homeland Security, Secret Service, whoever it may be, to find out what this crime is and how far it goes? Is it here? Does it flow overseas? Where does it begin and where does it end? It can be done. So here, in Illinois, this is a little bit of an old list. This is from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a great resource. If anybody wants to go to this Southern Poverty Law Center, they have a hate map, sounds like fun, which talks about all these different hate groups that are identified by them right here in Illinois. We don't have to go too far to find them. And of course, a lot of these, and we think usually consider the far right, or the Klan, the white supremacist movement as being hate crimes, which is still traditionally what we think about as hate crimes, and we still have a lot of active white supremacist groups that we have to deal with. There's also, we consider hate now, especially since October 7th. We've seen hate on the left, come from and hate on campus, and death to Jews, and combined with an anti-Israel attack, it doesn't negate the fact that it could also be a hate crime because they're basing it on Jewish people. Death to Jews and free Gaza are two separate issues. One could be a political statement, one could be a hate crime, right? And also advocating violence by any means necessary. Talking about, this was a post by somebody in Black Lives Matters, which later the other Black Lives Matters associates did disavow. However, it's important to show it's a hang glider with the Palestinian flag, which is emulating the terrorist attack in Israel. So all this is important to document and understand. We're looking at what the next thing is. And we've seen a lot of protests, which people have a right to peacefully protest. When it's no longer peaceful, it can become a hate crime. And it's important to understand the distinction and move forward and to ask for enforcement in those areas. But we also saw a huge uptick in anti-Asian hate crimes, throughout the last 4 years, and after that, I think during the pandemic, when there was a lot of propaganda and rhetoric attacking, the Asian community for causing COVID, there was also uptick in hate crimes against the Asian community. So, and there's been huge attacks on transgender communities. So all along, we see an increase in hate crimes everywhere we go, unfortunately. Again, here's another map, if you want to go to it, about different hate crimes that are located in Illinois. A nice grouping up here in Chicago. Here's another heat map. If you want to go to more information about the stuff, I don't want to belabor too much, but the Anti-Defamation League also keeps a heat map of different incidents and different hate crimes. And again, these are tremendously underreported, but it gives you an idea of where they're happening and how frequently. So again, I want to go back to hate crimes investigations, and we must prove motive. So recognition and reporting of hate crimes and why it's so important. Unlike almost every other statute on the book, we must get inside somebody's head to prove that they did this knowingly and intentionally and why they did it. Okay, why they did something, the motive behind it, which is sometimes extremely difficult. So during the course of a crime, it's important to document, the perception of the victim witnesses of the crime. What did they see? What did they believe happened? I think this is a crime. Okay, may or may not have been, but why do you believe that? Talk about that. Were there particular gestures? Was there notes? Was there written statements? Was there comments? Was there graffiti left behind? Were there similar incidents? Is there a pattern of this type of attacks in this neighborhood, that this neighbor is being attacked? Was victim engaged in promoting activities? Was it the Pride Parade? Was it a rally for Israel? What was happening at the time that would lead somebody to believe that this could have been motivated by some sort of hate? Also, was it incident coincided on a holiday? So the holiday could be something pro-holiday, celebrating, Israel Independence Day, or some of the white supremacists we see send out things on, Hitler's birthday. This is a day of hate, to go out and commit some hateful act. So we want to look at all these different avenues to see. And this is all, again, my favorite one I always put at the end. When you see a crime and there's an absence of any economic gain, we understand crimes on the average. Somebody mugs somebody, takes their wallet, takes their purse, right? I don't condone it. I prosecute those cases. But if there's none of that, somebody just hits somebody or smacks them or destroys something, and you can't figure out the reason why, sometimes that could be an interesting scenario for looking at the motivation for that particular crime, why it needs to be looked into a little bit more in depth. So when we go to the investigation, again, we must prove motive. We must collect critical information and any specific words or acts by the subject that can help to identify the motive. And it could be a tattoo, and not everybody who has that tattoo is a racist, and anybody has a symbol of a tattoo may or may not be, but those are certain indicators that have. Okay, certain slang was used, certain numbers, certain salutes. Anything is important to understand. And these hate symbols are used in typically three ways, right? By the offender to ultimately proclaim affiliation. Okay, yeah, I've got this tattoo, so when people see me, they know what I'm about. They know who I belong to. We see a lot of it, prison tattoos, people identified by the gangs they're involved in. Similarly, white supremacist groups and other groups have tattoos that are proudly showing their affiliation. So if you can identify this, it's important to know. Like I said, some symbols could mean other things as well, but that used with other circumstantial evidence could prove what somebody is involved in. Secondly, it can be used to strike fear and intimidation, right? The burning of a cross, that was meant to be a proclamation of we're here and we know you're here and we're here to intimidate you for it, right? Or putting of nooses on a tree limb. These are signs that to stay away, or doing graffiti of swastikas in different places. All these things are to strike fear and intimidation in the victims or the victim's community. Some could also be for internal messaging that may not be readily identifiable by somebody who doesn't know, right? The numbers 14 and 18, 88. H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. So H, Heil, and Hitler. HH, somebody is an 88, stands for Heil Hitler. Now, it doesn't mean everybody with an 88 is a white supremacist, but if combined with other evidence, it could link to that, right? 14 is another thing that we see a lot that talks about we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. So the 14 words are another slogan used by the white supremacist individuals. Now, some have moved and they don't proclaim this as much and trying to be undercover a little bit, but these are certain things that could be identified that we've seen. And these come in a matter of, dice that could be on a tattoo that seem innocuous, but when you look at it, oh, this is what it means. Or somebody with tattoos of a 14 or 88. It could mean this. So it's important to keep in mind. And there are many other symbols of hate, Stormfront logo, Aryan Nation, 1488, World Church. All these are possible symbols for different types of hate groups, especially from the white supremacist venue. So let's get back to our initial incident in our case with the Loop Synagogue. So that evening, smashes the window. They have a camera in place, but of course the camera can't quite get the facial recognition. It's a little bit far away. Gets the vehicle that comes up. The vehicle, you can't see this, but from the video, its white blinker light was malfunctioning. But they get the car, they get a picture, they send it out to media, see if somebody can identify this individual. And so the Chicago police gets to work in attempting to identify the individual. Keep a look at his clothing, dark clothes, top. He's got kind of a unique hat on. So they give an idea to try and get this out to the public. And again, there was great public outcall. They had a rally by the synagogue, and the community gathered to show support for the synagogue, which was great. But again, during this time, they wanted to identify the offender and what he's about, because again, what do we know about him? What is he doing? What's next? We don't know. So it's important to do it quickly and actively. And this is his first act. What is his next act? So the police and what they do, they have an evidence technician, removes the stickers. Now, I'd like to talk about this. Defendants are presumed innocent, not always intelligent. So they removed the stickers, but the evidence technician did a great job. And lo and behold, behind the sticker, what do you think? Prints and comparisons, right? Because what a great place to leave your fingerprint, but behind a sticker. So they're able to remove his fingerprints from the sticker. We're able to identify him from being previously printed and make a connection to who he is. And we locate this Andrew Wright, or his name's Andrew Stewart Wright is actually his name. But we locate also social media. Social media is a presence we must always continue to investigate. The online information is immeasurable, and people often like to talk about things they do or what they do. That's where people communicate. That's where people come out from under the rocks and talk about their what they believe and what they want to do. So we look to get him here. He takes a picture of himself with a, I believe it's a paint gun. There's also an incident after we identified him in which we locate him at a Portillo's out in DuPage County, sitting in a Portillo's with the paint gun in a large garbage bag that alarmed many of the customers, in which he was investigated and stopped for having possession of that bag and that gun, even though it was a paint gun, because it was, obviously suspicious, strange behavior. So his behavior, again, is escalating point by point. So what are we dealing with? What do we know? Here we also locate his car. We find out that the car had been just previously fixed for the light that was misblinking. When the incident occurred, that car was located out. His parents, who lived in Oak Brook, well-to-do parents. He grew up in a fine family. We talked to his parents, find out what he was about, what he was doing. We recovered the car, recovered the vehicle to identify it. He was a student at DePaul University. So just because somebody commits these crimes does not mean they're somewhere far, far away. He's in the mix. And thank you for DePaul University. Here is a nice picture of him. And thank you, Stuart Wright, for wearing pretty much the same clothes that you did when you committed the offense, having that hat on in the same way. So we identify him as a student at DePaul University who committed this act. And we start looking about who he is. We do a search warrant on his house in Pilsen, where he's living. We find a bunch of hateful materials. This is one of the materials we found during a search warrant at his house. It becomes interesting, too, when we look a little bit deeper into who this individual is and what he's about. And if you look below at the bottom in the middle of the page, there's a tightrope.cc. Now, that's a website. I wouldn't advise you necessarily go on it, but if you're interested, they sell a bunch of hate materials on there, including swastika stickers. Those were purchased by the defendant. So he got this material and many other materials from the website that he ordered to use later on, but also a bunch of hate type materials like this. So we catch our offender, Stuart Wright, and there we see him. He's got a large swastika tattoo on his back. We had another incident in which he was sitting outside his home, I think at the time in Elmhurst then, and he was with his shirt off so he could display his tattoo to his neighbors. Kept his hair tight and shaven, like a skinhead might. Also, something you may see in law enforcement and time again, when you see in the middle of the page, it says his name, it says refuse, refuse. So he refused to give his name or any information to the police upon arrest. This is something that we also see within sovereign citizen cases, people who, or the far right or libertarian who think that the government has no authority over them and refuse to cooperate with authorities. So it's not unusual that somebody would refuse to give their information to the police upon arrest. But the question is, who do we have here now? Once we want to investigate the case, what do we do with this individual? Because we want to know what he's all about. Is he a lone wolf or acting on his own? Is he connected or tied to other groups locally or nationally or internationally? Is this an escalating violent behavior? Do we have an issue of mental illness? And I just want to say about mental illness, just because somebody's suffering from mental illness does not negate them of being accountable. We find that there are times when people who have a mental illness also tie into some hate narrative and combine that with those particular incidents, start committing criminal acts. We need to hold these people accountable. Once we hold them accountable, then we will determine what to do with them and can address their mental illnesses. So just because somebody has a mental illness does not mean they cannot be convicted of a crime or shouldn't be. It is something to be taken into consideration. We also do a computer search to try and find out everything we can. We recover his phone, his computer. We trying to find out who he talked to. Did he have anybody else involved in this act? Was it him? Who did he call before and after the incident? Who does he talk to every day? Who do we need to reach out to? And his computer. And when we got his computer search, it was very interesting in the fact that there's these strange lists on his computers in which he would be like, okay, go to the store, buy apples, get some lotion, get us a swastika tattoo, go home, meet my sister. It was just a bizarre list of things with kind of things that you and I would seem like that's a pretty critical decision mixed in with this random list of other behavior. So all this taking consideration, trying to figure out who we're dealing with and what we do. So once we hold them accountable, we have them arrested, we have the opportunity to then decide what to do with him in the criminal justice system. So as I said before, under sentencing, he had no criminal background. So we have to decide on this individual, do we want to send him to prison or do we want to put him on probation? And of course, when you first get a case like this, we want to send him to prison. That's as a prosecutor, and it's often sometimes our first inclination is what is a maximum punishment. But really, we're looking to see what we can do and if there's a chance for rehabilitation, if there's a chance to steer him away from these hateful acts to help the future, that he'll be around. He won't be held forever. So what do we do with him? So if he's under probation, we look at he's still under the court's jurisdiction for a period of time. There is a potential for rehabilitation. We can address his mental illness, and he's got no previous conviction, right? So these are things we're considering when we're doing probation or prison. If he gets sentenced to prison, there's little rehabilitative prison services in jail, in the penitentiary. He may become further indoctrinated into a hate crime group, team up with other hate crime groups, but he does go to prison, or he meets somebody like this and ties in with him, and they have a future in criminal activity and hate crimes. So we decided at the time we're going to put him on probation. We decided to try and see if we can change this individual's behavior, what we can do and how we can do it while under the court supervision. So we still have him under our supervision for 2.5 years. So if he commits any crime whatsoever, we can resentence him and send him to jail based on the original conviction. He provided restitution to the synagogue. He had monthly reporting. We had him in psychiatric and psychological care. We also had him what's called off-ramp counseling. So he would talk to a former former neo-Nazi, to try and take him off this hate narrative, to try and bring him down another path. We take his DNA indexing. He has to do community service, and he writes a letter of remorse. So we try and put all these services in place to prevent him from committing more crimes. We're watching him, making sure that he's in mental health counseling. The judge then sentenced him to community service. His community service is sentenced to a location on the south side of Chicago, familiar, called St. Sabina, which is well known because it's run by Father Flager, who is a well-known activist in the area. So is down in the Englewood area of the city. So sending a white supremacist to an African-American area to do community service with that church, they thought may have an impact. So didn't quite have the impact we'd hoped. He did go down there, did his community service, and interesting enough, on the day that he had his 88th hour, remember 88, Heil Hitler, he comes and shows up with an 88 written on his forehead. He's also seen on the side of the church, giving the Heil Hitler sign to the wall. Father Flager tries to talk to him. He refuses to talk to him and walks away. They call the police, obviously, and we violate his probation. Here's a picture of him with the number 88 written in marker on his forehead. He claimed that it was for his favorite Bears, not Chicago Bears. Now, Chicago Bears did not have anybody of significance with the number 88 on his forehead, I guarantee. So he claimed that when we interviewed him. But of course, we don't stop there. We want to see more about him and what he's about. So we also go to his social media page. We're here under Stuart Wright. When I committed the 88 hate crime against the Jewish synagogue in Chicago and just kicked out of the ghetto black community service today for writing 88 on my forehead, ha ha. Well, pretty funny. So he decided to share it with the world about who he is and what he is all about. At the same time, we continue to look at him and see what other behavior he has committed. He also attempted to break into a middle school in Hinsdale, where he was stopped by the police. The school was not in session at the moment, but when again questioned about it, he said, "Sometimes I feel the need to stick up for my race." So here's an issue in which an individual who is not reacting, not changing his behavior, but it's actually worsening. Strange enough, too, he continued his diatribe. This is, again, one of my favorite, because he sent an email to Ariane Space, which is a kind of a rocket or transport group in France, has maybe worked on some aerospace type of things. And he learned that they had a Jewish pilot, or he condemned them, and how dare a place called Ariane Space would promote a Jewish pilot. Now, again, he did have a college education, but not presumed terribly smart, because I don't think Arian he confused with Aryan, Aryan, and so his neglect of that spelling was terrible. But again, it goes to show his continued indoctrination and his belief into what he believed. And this is probably the scariest part about him. So this was written by the former neo-Nazi who was doing his off-ramping counseling, in which Stuart Wright talked about his fascination with guns and serial killers, and how the troubled signs of intensity with his acts. And, and then again, he continued to concern that he fits the active shooter profile and his fascination with violent serial killers. So here we have an individual that cannot be rehabilitated under the attempts that were made, and also showed an alarming connection to be possibly another active shooter. So he was sentenced then to the Illinois Department of Corrections for the remainder of his sentence. So talk about a couple other cases we've dealt with to show you kind of diversity. This is Shahid Hussein. He was the one who walked with a cape that had a swastika tattoo on the back of it. It was written in a blanket. And he damaged over 10 Jewish schools and businesses writing swastikas. I don't know if you can see here too, he's got a Hitler mustache. So he was saying probably would not be accepted in the Aryan race, but here he promotes himself to be that. He attacked all these different locations. either swastikas, yelling at people, or smashing windows along the way. There's a copy of the cape that he wore, and a swastika put in a broken window he left in his wake. Now, again, this is an attack on the community. At the time this happened, people are like, is this one person? Is multiple people? Is the community being attacked? Because there were 12 incidents and swastikas everywhere, putting fear through the society and community about what to do and when to do it. So again, the communication has to be good within the community and also with law enforcement to understand what you're dealing with it and what this particular threat is. Again, we got his social media postings. I'm about to break the window at the synagogue in Kedzie and Devon with a rock. Let's see. It's an immediate attack. And also he believed that he was an Old Norse SS Royal, part of the new SS. We also talked to his former employer, worked at SNL Electric over on Ridge, and they had a whole packet of information, lists of his manifests about all the things that he claimed to do and what he did and how they've been trying to address the situation. So again, we have to look and investigate further to find out what they're about, what they've done, where they're going, because if it stands alone, we don't know. He was then also sentenced to Illinois Department of Corrections. A couple other type of cases that we had in the last couple of years. Eugene Warren, a little bit different. It comes from the Black Israelites, so an anti-Semitic group who believe that they're the only lost tribe of Israel. He went to a Chicago Public Library on a number of occasions where there was this display about the history of the Jewish people in Chicago, and he would write on this display, fake Jews, not white, not Europeans. His crime rate, criminal damage to property, based on a motivation of attacking the Jewish people. Again, a hate crime. He was also sentenced. And here's kind of more generic terms. What we see was such a harmful, I think, hate crime. We talk about it like a generic type hate crime, but it really hurts people, I think, in a most tremendous way, because this situation, Sarah Hassan Abdul Rasul was at a bar in Streeterville, I believe. The bartender was Jewish, had a Jewish necklace on, right? The Star of David. She yelled at her, called her a stupid whore, and say, take the necklace off. And then she threw a full glass at the victim, striking her on the chest, hurting her collarbone. Why? Just because somebody's wearing a necklace, going about doing their job. No additional interpersonal connection to the person, didn't know the person, but just because of the symbol they're wearing. And this is a quintessential hate crime in which somebody's attacked for just being who they are, where they are, and doing what they're doing. So I think it's really a horrible affliction of what occurred. Here's another, this happy individual, Jay Bolin, stopped by the gate of a Jewish school, started screaming at a rabbi and yelling, I'm going to kill you, and we're going to put you in the gas chambers and bring you like the Nazis did. Yes, 6'5", 250 pounds, screaming and yelling. So again, these happened within the last couple of years in Chicago. Not to alarm you, but no, we all must continue to remain vigilant. Let me get to a couple of your questions if I can. So why are crimes against women not considered hate crime? You can be, going to go back to slide. Gender is a connection for hate crime. You talked about female students in Montreal. They're using an example. Every state has different statutes, and every state is differently. But gender is something that can be used to charge someone with a hate crime. The question was, why are crimes against women not considered hate crimes, which they can be if the motivation is based on the fact that the person, based on their gender. So isn't state and federal prosecution for the same offense double jeopardy? It's a good question, but it's actually, they charge it a little bit differently. You would think it would be, but the state is charged in the fact that an individual commits an act, the criminal damage to property, and that it's combined with the motivation of a hate crime, or in like the case in Georgia, murder based upon a motivation of hate crime. And in the federal government charges them with a violation of their civil rights, which is under federal guidelines. So it has been proven it is different. A lot of this came out of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, when local prosecutions were not prosecuting individuals for committing crimes because they had a racist criminal justice system. So the feds could come in and charge cases. So even though it seems like the same, it can be divvied up and distinguished from the federal and state statutes. Are the repeated extremist Palestinian targeted attacks against Jews in America to inflict physical and psychological assaults, ultimately threatening the existence of Jews in America and their attempts to influence the American government? Do they constitute domestic terrorism to be dealt with on a federal level? So, the current state of affairs, obviously, protests, peaceful political protests are protected. When those protests turn into something criminal, those are crimes that should be prosecuted. Cases are vetted to determine whether somebody is committing crimes or targeting individuals. We work with all the federal agencies and identifying them to determine what the scope of behaviors are. So, yes, they can. So there's got to be a distinction between the political and the criminal. And sometimes it starts political, but it turns criminal. And many of these protests in which somebody steps over the line and starts punching somebody, the attack, I think in California, where somebody's hit because they're holding up an Israeli flag. There's another incident actually in Chicago where somebody's attacked for having an Israeli flag. Those should be criminal acts and those should be prosecuted criminally. So why did Andrew actually write a letter of remorse and he clearly had no remorse? We asked for a statement and the judge wanted a statement from the individual. And I think that he didn't have to write a letter of remorse. He offered to because his lawyer was advocating for him to get probation rather than go to the penitentiary. And he wrote it and had it read into the record. It's hard at that point to fully understand what's in somebody's heart, in somebody's head. You take a whole consideration before you do any sentencing. They do a pretrial report, talk to his family, talk to his doctors, talk to a bunch of individuals to determine whether somebody would be a good candidate for that. But again, somebody can just write it and not care, which obviously he did. So it's not the first time people have lied. Obviously, criminals have lied. So the man who charged and yelled at the rabbi, why was that charged as a crime? Doesn't seem to qualify as a crime. He threatened to attack him. That's an assault. If you threaten somebody to physically attack somebody, and you put that individual in a reasonable apprehension of receiving a battery, meaning being hit, then that is an assault. And if that assault is based upon the motivation for hate, then it becomes a hate crime. If you have more questions, please get in. But I want to say there are a lot of people in the area who are doing a lot to help with this situation and fight against hate crimes and awareness. One of the great things that the Holocaust Museum is doing, I'll say, is teaching law enforcement. So every month, more than once a month, the Real Law Enforcement Action and Democracy Training teaches police officers, new recruits in Chicago Police Department, in the sheriff offices, other groups, suburban groups, what it's like to be a police officer during the Holocaust. Those who maybe were career police officers and how the law changed and forced them to then enforce racial laws to allow Jewish people to be victims of crime and other people to be victims of crime, and understand that ethical and moral dilemma and trying to build that morality and thought process in police officers or becoming police officers. There's also part of the presentation is talking about hate crimes, understanding, identifying different points of view and different things. So I think the Holocaust Museum is doing tremendous work in trying to educate individuals who have this authority and are out on the streets, working the streets to um, train the police to help identify. So when victims come to them, they understand it and they can handle it in a better, more respectful, and more accurate and proactive way. And all these other groups, that we've worked with, part of the group that I work now, the Cook County's Attorney's Response to Anti-Semitic Hate Crimes, all these different groups have been incredible advocates. The Jewish United Fund has helped build things. The Simon Wiesenthal Center, obviously the Holocaust Museum, the ADL, the American Jewish Congress, Hillel, fighting anti-Semitism and hate crimes on campus. We worked at the Illinois Department of Human Rights. We're having a statewide hotline to fight hate crimes. The U.S. Attorney's Office have a Unite Against Hate program. The Decalogue Society, group of Jewish lawyers and judges who are working in anti-Semitic groups to fight anti-Semitism. The Sharim Society, which is Jewish police officers working together to try and identify hate crimes. The Chicago Rabbinical Council, the Reform Movement, the Conservative Movement of Rabbis, the Attorney General. All these groups, and the FBI, are all working together to try and help fight these. But it only can be successful with people like yourselves who are out there working this. And it goes again, the people on the street and the citizens who have to be out there to remain vigilant. And again, the old adage, if you see something, say something, make sure it gets reported. If law enforcement is not listening to you, if you can't get a report taken down, call one of these advocacy agencies, call your local rabbi, talk to your community members, talk to your local politician, make sure that they listen, that they get involved, and they are able to attack these type of criminal behavior. It's important that not just for local law enforcement, but we have to tie in and advance these cases with federal law enforcement wherever it goes. So I just want to say, being out there and educating yourself and having awareness, you are part of the solution, and bring you and making sure what you see and what information you have, and the boots on the ground and your eyes in the streets, that information gets into the right hands so it can be used and identify and respond to hate crimes appropriately with authority and compassion. If anybody has any follow-up questions or wants to contact me or has information they want to share, this is my information. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to come talk to any groups that you are all part of. I'm happy to push this forward. Like we always say, we're on this together, trying to push it forward and make it better. And the only way we do this is by working together. So again, I appreciate and thank the Holocaust Museum for everything that they've done in pushing this forward and identifying this. And I want to thank everybody here for attending.